Records were broken, more upsets shaking up conference standings. All of this as we start the playoff push. Mitch, let's talk some football.
Let's do it.
Talking Illinois high school football.
If your goals are as high as you talk about, tonight's the night you go out and just take one more step.
It's a view from the West.
And it starts right now!
Welcome back to View from the West podcast. I'm your host, Greg Armstrong, joined as always by Mitch Stormer. Mitch, we're through week 4, moving into week 5. This is like the halfway point of the season. It is the halfway point of the season. Can you believe we've gotten this far?
Yeah, it seems like it goes by pretty quickly every year, right? Seems like we were just talking about conference previews and things of that nature. And now we're, by this time next week, we will be over halfway through. So, but we're starting to get into that part of the season where matchups are really, starting to matter a little bit more. You're seeing more conference shifting and seeing more teams get into a position to get that 5th and then obviously automatic 6th to win. So not quite there yet. A lot of things can happen, but the closer we get, the more exciting it becomes.
Mitch, what do we call it? Is it the playoff push? Is it the path to the playoffs? Is it the drive for 5? What do we go with here?
I don't know if we're in playoff push yet, right?
Okay.
That's probably.
Is that reserved for week 7 maybe?
I was gonna say week 6, and certainly depending on your record. So I think drive for 5 is always a pretty good, indicator as a season goal. So, some teams are already there almost, knocking on the door. But we'll get into it as we talk about it some more. Some teams that are positioning themselves a lot better than maybe we thought they might be at least at this stage in the season. Teams that have 3 wins already that maybe we didn't expect. So a lot of teams are getting, into good position as we get through this basically second half of the season almost.
Well, Mitch, that's a perfect segue into what we call our viewpoints, the headlines from week 4. Mitch, I'll let you start. What's your viewpoint heading into week 5 here?
Yeah, and just kind of expanding upon that a little bit, we talked about throughout the year some of these games in early weeks were kind of pivotal matchups, games that would maybe determine your standing, so to speak, in the tiers of these conferences. We saw games this week, Moline over Rocky, obviously always a big game, not only for the Western Big Six, but for both teams in their playoff pushes. We're seeing good things out of Quincy, Geneseo, St. Bede. I've been talking them up all season. I think St. Bede and Newman was probably a key game that we looked at for both of those teams. So games like that, as we just continue to go on, and as I just talked about, we're seeing more and more teams in a better spot than we thought that they would be, in a better spot to get to that 5th win, to get to that 6th win.
Mitch, there are 2 teams in particular that came away with huge wins in the Lincoln Trail Conference and the Northwest Upstate Illini that pushed those teams to 3 wins. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but that's a tease ahead. There was a couple teams that really put themselves in a better spot playoff-wise with a win in week 4. My viewpoint from week 4 is, Mitch, I was back for Marquette's homecoming, my alma mater. I was back for homecoming for the first time in years. It maybe since I was in high school. It's been a long time since I've been back to the homecoming game. I've been back for regular season games, a few of them, and for playoff games, certainly, but I hadn't been back to homecoming for a while, and it felt different. It was fun. I saw a lot of people from my class. I saw people from my brother's class. My dad had classmates that were in town, and we met up with them after the game and kind of sat around and talked, and it was just fun to see a lot of familiar faces, supporting the Marquette football team and supporting Marquette Academy in general. And it was just a lot of fun to, the atmosphere is great. They won the game. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it was just cool. It was cool to be back. It felt different than, I've been to a million homecomings for a million different schools over the years and just covering high school football. But to be back at my own school, it was nice. It was a great Friday night.
Yeah, a nice little nostalgic moment for you, and you brought the boys, so I can only imagine how nice that was for you.
Yeah, it was fun. Casey was on the sideline with me for a little while, kind of helping me shoot video, He was up with Grandpa, up with my dad, doing some PA announcing. He didn't actually do the PA announcing, but he would be the spotter up there in the booth. And then of course, other times he was playing football behind the end zone and going and getting candy and doing all the things that, an 11-year-old does at a high school football game. So, so it was a lot of fun. Mitch, you were out of town, out of state at a wedding. Are you recovered? Are you back in the fold here, ready to go?
Yeah, I was able to, see the end of action on a lot of these games. We wrapped up rehearsals and things of that nature somewhat early on, and we had a pretty early day driving out there, so we turned in early, I should say, and I was able to tune in to some of these finishes. So yeah, I was able to still get some of this in on Friday night, even from Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Well, all that being said, to any of our loyal listeners of the Instant Reacts podcast, my apologies. I meant to tweet out early in the weekend that there would not be an Instant Reacts podcast. Zach Shapiro was tweeting at us asking if it was going to be happening. So my apologies to everyone who was looking forward to that on Saturday morning. With Mitch being out of town and me also being out of town, I wasn't back at WQAD studios to meet up with them. So I'm sorry to everyone who missed out on Brian Stocking for a week. Oh yeah, and Matt Randazzo and Corey Kuffler and Camille, but Brian Stocking, you missed out on Stocking. But
who did they have as guest griller this week?
Pat Angerer, former Iowa Hawkeye and former NFL player from the Indianapolis Colts. Pat Angerer was there. I did not get a chance to see what he grilled. I don't think there was a fire because I didn't hear about that, so that's good.
Yeah. So speaking, we don't talk about Iowa too much, but speaking of Iowa, boy, Bettendorf is not good. Boy, that's quite the throw. I mean, I'm not throwing shade on Iowa football, but I mean, in the time that we worked, Greg, right? And for the longest time, Bettendorf was the powerhouse, not only in the state. Well, I should say not only in the conference, but in the state.
Yeah.
And Davenport West was the opposite. And now it's like the tables have turned where Davenport West is really good and Bettendorf is just really struggling. It's surprising to see, but I have no other context for it other than that I saw it.
Yeah. For our listeners that are near the Quad Cities, you may have some frame of reference there that it is a very historic football season for West and for Bettendorf for very different reasons. Right. So either way, it is entertaining. It is very entertaining, making for a very entertaining season. One more so positively than the other. But to everyone who listens, thank you so much. Spread the word, like we said. If you like what we're doing here and you want to support View from the West, head over to PayPal. Mitch, it's now as easy as going directly to paypal.me/viewfromwestpod. So paypal.me/viewfromwestpod. If you didn't memorize that, it's okay. It's pinned as our top tweet on our Twitter account right now. So please consider helping us out. Anyway, Mitch, there's a very entertaining football season on the Illinois side. That's what we focus on here. So let's jump into the Western Big Six. Mitch, it's the rivalry of all rivalries. One of maybe the oldest in the state, Moline and Rock Island. Moline gets the win 49-24. The story of this one, Riley Fuller racked up 262 yards, scored 5 touchdowns in the win against Rock Island. Mitch, he now has 750 yards and 11 touchdowns through 4 games. Can you say View from the West Player of the Year candidate?
Yeah, he is on the right track. There's no doubt about it. That's back-to-back weeks of over, what do you have, 279 yards last week. So two straight weeks of over 260. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So he had touchdown runs of 92 yards, 81 yards, and 64 yards. His breakaway speed was impressive to see in this one, but he credited the O-line. And Mitch, I got to agree with him. You don't do that kind of damage without having a little bit of help up front. I think we knew that this Moline line would be pretty good, and they really have been proving it. And it's been coming out in the stats for Fuller, but they've been getting the work done up front for sure.
Right, and we talked a little bit about it last week again that we didn't know quite what Moline's offense would look like this year. We had an idea, but maybe didn't know how effective they would be. And they've certainly answered that question already. So all the credit to Coach Morrissey, to the staff, to the players on that as they continue again in this game here and as they have all season to really be impressive on the ground.
Yeah, let's dive into this game a little bit. Moline built a 20-3 lead, but Rock Island's Quintarian Brooks punched it in from 13 yards out. That cut the lead to 20-10 at the half. He would finish with 138 yards on the ground. In the second half, things got interesting. Rock Island would cut the lead to 20-17 late in the third quarter after Connor DiUlio found a wide open Desmond Woodson for a 32-yard touchdown pass. Rock Island seemed to be gaining a little momentum, but Mitch, I don't think I need to really put a pop quiz in front of you. Guess who answered for the Maroons?
Yeah.
Riley Fuller going 64 yards for a touchdown. Moline would force 5 turnovers on the night, including Cooper Marsh, a pick 6, and that would pretty much do it. Moline looking really good in this one. They run away with it. It may have been a little closer than this score indicates, but credit to Moline. They look really tough, and they win the rivalry this year.
Yeah, and as a second straight week, really, where their defense is such a good complement to that run game, forcing the turnovers, key stops. They did the same thing against Quincy last week. Really good offense in Quincy, especially what they did this week that we'll talk about here in a minute. But so as much as we talk about the Moline offense, that running game for good reason, the defense continues to need to have recognition. There you go. Recognition, right? In the season long, progression, because they seem to be getting better and better as well.
Yeah. Yep. Moline looking good. They get the win. They remain unbeaten in Western Big Six play. Let's move along to Quincy. They get the win over United Township 49-14. This one was also an interesting game because the final score makes it look like a rout, but you certainly would not think that watching in the first half. Jarius Rice scored from 32 yards out midway through the first quarter. That gave Quincy a lead. Both teams traded field position for a while in the first half. The Panthers would put together an 81-yard scoring drive, capped off by a quarterback keeper from Matthew Kelly. That would tie the game at 7. Now, at this point, we're late first half. It's tied at 7. I know the final score, but I watched the replay of this game, and literally at one point I had to double check to make sure I was watching the right game because I'm waiting to see all this offense, and it's 7-7 and it's almost halftime. Well, then as I think that, in a matter of seconds, Braden Little finds Jake Meadowmeyer over the middle. He finds a seam, goes 70 yards for the score right before half, like literally within about 20 seconds of the half. So it's 13-7 heading into the break. Quincy goes on to score the next 35 points. And Mitch, this is where the record-setting performance takes over for Braden Little.
Yeah. And before we get into that, because I know that you'll probably give this to me during the St. Bede recap, but I'm going to throw it back to you because you've been pretty high on Braden Little lately, and for good reason, if nothing else than what he did on Friday night. So, the story of the game, story of the second half certainly was Braden Little sets a single-game Quincy school record with 5 touchdowns and 373 passing yards, Greg. Only
That's impressive.
Only a sophomore. We've seen in this conference specifically QB starting to play their sophomore year. We saw it with Geneseo last year, saw it in UT last year. Little seems to maybe be a step ahead of where those guys were last year. And man, the future is so bright for him, I think, and for this Quincy team.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing him doing the damage, and he's got some weapons around him. On the receiving end, Meadowmeyer finished with 148 yards on 3 touchdowns. Gregory Quince, a name we talked about a lot last year, added 2 receiving touchdowns. Senior Brian Douglas had 110 yards on the ground. He also had 24 receiving yards. Tykel Hammers led Quincy's receiving core with 6 catches for 99 yards. So they're really spreading the wealth here. I think in the preseason, we talked about a lot of different names. One of them actually, unfortunately, being Aiden Byquist, who's not here. He's injured out for the year. He'll be back next year. But in the meantime, it's been next man up. This Quincy team has a lot of weapons, and they're utilizing them, and they're playing really well.
Arguably, their best player isn't even on the field for them, and here they are sitting at 3-1, right?
Yep.
And again, I've just been so impressed with how it seems like better and better they've been playing, right? After their first game against Quincy Notre Dame in week 1. They've just continued to look better and better. So big things coming here for the Blue Devils, I think. Really looking forward to their game this week when they go to Galesburg, which we'll get to in a minute. But again, from a more of a longer outlook, I think Quincy is going to be a team here, even this season and going into next season, that's going to be starting to creep up with the Sterlings and the Moline.
Mitch, getting back to United Township, they were in this game. It was 7-7, almost halftime. And then you think about the ways that Quincy was able to score. It's almost complete opposites. They score with Metameyer's 70-yard touchdown run in a matter of seconds. And then on the flip side, they start the second half with a long drive. I believe the score gets up to 21-7. So you look at, UT had it tied at 7, almost to halftime. And then you start the third quarter, and before you know it, it's a long sustained drive. You're down 2 touchdowns. This United Township team, they're way better than an 0-4 team. That said, they've had mistakes and they've had things that haven't worked out in their favor. They got some things to figure out. I still think there's some upsets along the way, but I don't think someone should look at this record and say same old UT from 5, 6, 7 years ago, because I don't think that's the case. There's too much talent on this team to say that, but there's things that have got to change. There's things that just aren't working right now for them. They've got to figure out a way to, to flip that a little bit if they want to pull off some upsets down the stretch.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. So it's unfortunately, a rough year record-wise for UT, but they've shown signs, and they've continued to show signs. They just need to put it all together. And as you said, there's opportunities there, this season. So looking forward to seeing how they continue to get better and get a win this year.
Yep. Before we wrap up our Quincy talk, Mitch, I got to give a shout out to Matt Shuckman and Don O'Brien from Muddy River Sports. I want to recommend their podcast, the Muddy River Breakdown. I've enjoyed hearing their perspective from the Quincy point of view when we're talking Western Big Six. It's been good to hear, kind of their thoughts on the season as Quincy has gone along. So I recommend it to everybody. I feel like we promote their coverage, and now we're kind of bridging that gap in the Western Big Six, right? This is kind of our public service to the Big Six. We're bridging communities together, making the Big Six a little smaller, right?
Yeah, people helping people is what we're all about here.
That's right.
We love their coverage, and looking forward to continuing to see it throughout the rest of the year.
Now, I will say we can bring people together, but it doesn't make the drive any shorter. It's still the same distance, but
that's right.
We do what we can.
Right, that's exactly right.
We do what we can. Well, let's go on to Sterling getting the win 69-0 over Alleman. Golden Warriors scored 13 points in the first quarter. They add another 42 points in the second quarter to lead this game 55-0 at the half. Mitch, 69 points is the most scored by a Golden Warrior team in 50 years. So not quite a program record, but pretty darn close. We had plenty of record-breaking performances. This one came pretty darn close. If you haven't done it in 50 years, I'd say it's still pretty impressive. Right. Yeah.
Again, we've talked a lot about Alleman this year. We know the struggles that they're going to have, and it's a bit expected, right, to see an outcome like this when you've got a team like Sterling playing as well as they've been playing all year against a team like Alleman, who's just rebuilding to the best of their abilities. But as you said, circumstances are what they are. Anytime you can set a record, certainly in that sort of time frame with a program like Sterling, pretty impressive. And they've been doing it in the same ways that we've seen them do all season, right? They were playing to their strengths. Cale Lettergerber scored a pair of touchdowns early in this one. Justin Knoll had a couple of touchdowns. Good to see Antonio Tablante back on the field. He also had a couple of touchdowns. And then names that we're so familiar with: AJ Kested, JP Schilling. So it was the whole cast of Golden Warriors in this one. More of a tune-up game for them. Big game this week that we'll talk about too. Game of the week probably, and then across the whole slate of games with Geneseo. So really looking forward to that one. So good win for Sterling. Hopefully they come out unscathed, get their injuries taken care of, and they'll be ready to go for a big matchup in this upcoming week.
Yep. Well, speaking of that Geneseo football team, they came away with the win over Galesburg 21-7. Homecoming night, Hall of Fame night at Bob Reed Field. The Leafs overcome some injuries, played defiantly on defense, jump out to 2-0 record in conference play. Connor Welke and Jaden Weinzero sidelined with injury. Junior AJ Weller led all rushers with 152 yards, 2 touchdowns on 17 carries. Also completed 5 of 7 passing for 65 yards and a touchdown. Junior running back Jaron Neal really stepped up this week, filling in for Welke, added 66 yards on 15 carries. So Mitch, great performance by AJ Weller. Good to see him kind of step in and really take on that role when it was needed. Hopefully the players we referenced are back on the field, certainly impact players for the Maple Leafs. They'll really need down the stretch if they're healthy. Hopefully they are. But Mitch, this Geneseo defense, they're getting the job done.
Yeah, and again, as they have all season, they continue to shine. They still rank first in conference in points allowed. I think they've only allowed 50 through 4 games. So they're going to be tested, though, this week. Yeah, and a good Sterling team. And again, we'll get to that matchup in a minute. But for the Streaks, new quarterback, I believe, Geno Williams, in for Tristan Legate. Had a pretty good highlight play in the second quarter. He evaded a few Geneseo defenders and scrambled. It was only 7 yards out, but he ran, more like 30 by the end of the play. So, a nice play for them. But again, it was that Geneseo defense that just kept that offense in check and scored just enough times to make this somewhat of a comfortable win.
Yeah, I was impressed with what I saw on that run, like you said, from Geno Williams from the quarterback position. I don't know what kind of arm he has, but, certainly that kind of athleticism is a weapon, out of the quarterback spot. So see what Galesburg can do. And down the road, I don't know if Tristan Legate will be out with injury or, what the exact situation is there. Certainly hope he's healthy, but it was nice to see, like we've talked about, the next man in having some success there, and that being Williams for Galesburg. Well, let's look at the Week 5 slate in the Western Big Six. We have Rock Island at United Township, Quincy at Galesburg, Geneseo at Sterling, and Moline taking on Alleman. Mitch, I think you already kind of called it out. The rivalry game this week, the game of the week in the Western Big Six, Geneseo at Sterling.
Yeah, I think that's going to also be probably my game of the week across all the conferences that we talk about. This is really going to set either one of these two teams, I think, to on a collision course with Moline for the conference crown. Biggest questions kind of going into this is the health of both teams, right? Sterling got Antonio Taplante back. Not sure if Cale Ryan was playing on Friday, but certainly on the Geneseo side of things, without having Wenzero and Welke. Again, did they just sit out as precautionary so they are ready for this big game this upcoming week? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate either. So let's just assume both teams are healthy, right? They both have similar strengths. So I think it will come down to defense, which defense can stop the other's unit. Obviously, Sterling has been so versatile this year. And Geneseo has proven to be the same. So these are two really good, nearly identical type of, teams so far this season. So really looking forward to this on Friday.
Yeah, Mitch, we talked about it. It was your viewpoint to start the show. I think this becomes one of those pivotal games. This becomes one of those X factor type of games that we'd call it, because right now you got Sterling and Geneseo both at 2-0, and Moline is sitting at 2-0 in conference play as well. And Moline plays Sterling and Geneseo in weeks 8 and 9. So depending on what happens in this one of these teams has potential to be right in the mix with Moline. Depending on what happens, obviously Moline needs to win their games as well. And then the other, factor is that you have Quincy and Rock Island with 1 loss. So there's a lot at play here. But I think for these two teams in particular, Geneseo and Sterling, if they want to stay on that path, this is a big game for them. Yeah, that's the one I'm looking forward to.
Yep.
Well, Mitch, let's get into the Three Rivers Athletic Conference. The big game that stood out to me, St. Bede gets the win 34-7 over Sterling Newman.
Yeah.
Mitch, the Bruins are 4-0 for the first time since I was a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
That's been quite a long time ago. That's 1997 we're talking about.
I was going to say the year. You can't just lead off with that. You got to say the year. That stat impresses me. It surprises me, I guess, is another way to say that, because it's been what, 20 some years. I can't even do the math. 25 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I talked about it. I think when we were talking about this game last week in the preview, that this was a game where we saw a really good, it was a really good St. Bede offense against a really stout Newman defense, and a really stout St. Bede defense against maybe a struggling Newman offense. Yep. And that's exactly how it played out, right? The offense just shined for the Bruins. And again, that Newman offense just continues to get one score a game almost. So, but more than that, it's more impressive for St. Bede that they continue to do what they've been doing all season.
Yeah, well, let's talk through it a little bit. Mitch, he's got to be a player of the year candidate for us already. St. Bede's John Brady with another 4 touchdown passes. And like you said, the strong defensive effort for the Bruins highlighted by 2 interceptions. That led him to the win. Let's talk through the game a little bit. Game stayed close for most of the first half. The separation came late in the first half and early in the second. Again, similar to Quincy, 2 different styles. On the final drive of the first half, St. Bede drove 66 yards, converting 2 4th down and 2s on their way to grab a 20-8 halftime lead. Early second half, St. Bede strikes again. This time, it's the quick strike, 69-yard touchdown pass from Brady to Mason Hurst. So just being able to be effective on 2 different styles of offense. The grind it out, make sure you get those 4th down conversions, keep moving the ball downfield, keep the chains moving, or boom, that big strike, that dangerous kind of passing game that John Brady is shown to have. That makes St. Bede a very dynamic offense if they can, punch it in 2 different ways like that.
Yeah, and, increasingly becoming a very intriguing play in the 1A rankings, as we've seen maybe some turmoil in the 1A rankings this season. I really like how they're positioning themselves to maybe make a playoff run here. Obviously, a long ways to go, but they haven't shown anything but that since. We talked a little bit about the St. Bede defense, and it's, again, that name that we talked about last week. It's Ryan Brady. And what else? He had an interception. It's his 4th straight game with an interception. So
basically, his brother John's throwing touchdown passes, and he's picking off passes. So, yeah.
I would advise teams to not throw that way. But he might find the ball anyway, the ball hawk that he's been playing like. So yeah. And then again, he picks off a pass, returns to the Newman 41, and 2 plays later, John Brady finds Tom McCransky over the middle for a 23-yard touchdown. So, and Brady would add a 4th touchdown pass to really bring this one to its final resting place in the 3rd. So once again, it's a really great win for St. Bede. It's another impressive performance as they move on. Looking ahead to this week, I think they do have a bye week. So, I don't think it will affect them in terms of like riding that momentum, but it'll give them maybe a chance to reset, fix if they're having some issues, which I'm sure that they are. They're not really showing up on the scoreboard. So they might have a bye week here, but that would give them their 5th win. So there you go.
Yeah, an impressive start for the Bruins. And when you consider that some of the teams they're beating, Newman is usually a 2A school. They beat Kewanee early in the year, which has been a 4A school. So when you start looking down the way, that's an impressive resume for a St. Bede team that's going to end up in the 1A bracket. So that there's a lot of potential there for them in that Class 1A pool. So we'll see where they end up. Mitch, let's talk about the other team making all the headlines in the Three Rivers. Princeton gets the 70-21 win over Mendota. Mitch, the final score may not reflect the start for the Tigers. They fumbled the opening kickoff. Then again, they fumble on their opening possession. But to say the memory was quickly erased would be a massive understatement. Tigers explode for 7 touchdowns in the second quarter to run away with a 49-point halftime lead on their way to the big win. 70 points, the most a Princeton team has scored going back 6 decades. So, Mitch, these records, these historic numbers we're putting up in week 4. It was a lot of fun for some teams, and other teams maybe not so much. But Princeton's looked really good.
Yeah. Again, you hate to sound like a broken record, but it's just the same old thing, right? For Princeton, just another team that they just steamroll. And it's the same type of players, right? Tegan Davis, who committed last week, I believe it was, right, to Eastern Illinois.
Yep.
Really proved why here, right? 2 touchdowns on the ground, threw for 2 more, and we had a pick 6. So, actually, I don't know if it was a pick 6, but he returned an interception. Oh no, he did. It was a pick 6.
It was pick 6. Yeah, give him the credit here.
Yeah. So 5 touchdowns, and apparently that was all in the second quarter. So why not? Finished with 316 yards passing, the second most in school history. So, and 5 touchdowns. So again, we're just seeing terrific passing performances from a lot of good quarterbacks here in the area.
Mitch, from firsthand experience, it's hard to do 4 touchdowns and an interception for a touchdown in a game or in a couple games, let alone in one quarter.
Yeah, I don't think I did it in a season. So, to do it in one quarter, that is incredibly impressive. But again, it's Tegan Davis. It's, would you expect anything less? I don't think you would. So, again, this is a great win for Princeton. They've probably started 4-0. I can't remember when they played. Was Kewanee the first game they played last year? Maybe.
No, it was week 5. So it was.
Okay.
It was, this week a year ago.
Without looking at it, I'm sure they have started 4-0. I
would think
for the past few seasons here. So,
we'll need to consult. We'll need to consult the record books on Mitch Stormer's stats there to see.
Right. I was very vague about it, so I feel like I would probably get away with it.
So, let's see here. Tegan Davis finished with 316 yards passing, the second most in school history, and he had the 5 touchdowns. How about, we're not done yet though. How about the day from Noah Laporte, 6'4" sophomore on the receiving end of 4 Davis touchdowns, good for a school record 206 yards and 3 touchdowns, including an 80-yarder and a 48-yarder in the second quarter. He actually broke the record, was set a year ago by Bennett Siren, so potentially one of his teammates from a year ago.
Right.
So just a lot of impressive numbers and just impressive football being played in Princeton right now.
Well, you wonder kind of if Noah Laporte might be following the Tegan Davis, career line where he was a receiver and then, converted to quarterback. I don't know anything about if Noah Laporte can throw. But again, when you have that sort of athleticism on the outside, Princeton has proven that they can, use you in other ways and be versatile in that way. So yeah, good to see him and fortunate enough to see him hopefully for a couple of years of Princeton football here left.
Very, very intriguing thought there, Mitch. Quickly before we wrap this one up, looking at Mendota's day, Anthony Childs did give the Trojans a spark with a 70-yard touchdown run in the second quarter. That would cut it to 21-7. Obviously, it wasn't nearly enough in this one, but good to see him continue to have success for the Trojans. Mitch, let's go to one of the biggest games in the Three Rivers, one of the biggest results, important wins for the Morrison Mustangs. They get the win over Hall in overtime, 38-32. Mitch, the Red Devils scored 24 points in the fourth quarter to force overtime. In overtime, the Mustangs scored on a touchdown. The Red Devils stopped their 2-point conversion. On their opening play for the Red Devils possession in overtime, they start with a 9-yard touchdown run. So that put them at the 1-yard line because the high school rules, you start at the 10. Puts them at the 1. A bobbled snap a play later ends up in a 5-yard loss. Then on third down, they fumble the handoff. Morrison recovers to win the game. Mitch, I got to give huge credit to Morrison here because when you give up 24 points in the fourth quarter, man, it's easy to get frustrated. And, I don't think you say give up, but it's easy to start looking around and say, what do we got to do to win this game? What's going wrong? And to kind of suck it up and keep mentally strong and to pull this one out. This is a huge win for Morrison.
Well, I think that goes back to how they've been playing this season, right? They played Newman close. The score didn't indicate that, like we talked about with Newman's, short goal to gain, short sort of possessions. Played Kewanee tough. played Roseville tough and squeaked out a win there. So this is just how they've been. They've been playing close games, but again, because of that, when you get into situations like this, you're emotionally, you're mentally, sort of prepared for that and equipped for that. And this was a game, remember last year that Hall just steamrolled Morrison. Mac Sedich had 5 touchdowns, I think, in that game. So revenge win for Morrison. Good to see them get their second win. A team that we talked about at the beginning of the year that we thought they would do better than they did last year. They've got an opportunity for a 3rd straight win playing Sherrard this week. So, but they're doing it on the ground. Greg, a traditional Morrison team, Carson Strating, Brady Anderson, Logan Baker, they combined for over 300 yards. Quarterback Danny Mao connecting with his key receivers, Chase Newman, Deshaun McQueen. So, yeah, this is really, really good for Morrison. Love to see that win here and to pull off a cliffhanger of a game.
Yeah, Mitch, one of the, important X factors here for this Morrison offense seems like it's Brady Anderson. He's kind of emerged as a freshman, really starting to be a productive back for them. And as he goes, it seemed like this team goes. So that's a huge piece for them. So we'll see, what he can continue to do and continue to make a difference for Morrison. Mitch, you mentioned Mac Sedich. He still got his in this one, scored 4 touchdowns in this one for the Red Devils. They fall to 1-3 on the season. But getting back to Morrison, that's huge. They start 0-2, now looking at 2-2. Mitch, we'll talk about it later in the show, but I do think there's potential for this Morrison team to find themselves with 5 wins. I think there's potential for that to happen. We'll talk more about it in a little bit. Let's look down the way. Rock Ridge gets the 51-21 win over Erie Prophetstown. Peyton Locke returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown. That jump-started the Rockets out to a 44-7 halftime lead. Never looking back, Jacob Bain, Cam Bonzak, Connor Deem, and Alex Zarlatanis all scored for the Rockets as well. Mitch, this Rock Ridge offense, when they get rolling, when they get clicking, that is a huge sign for them because the defense has been playing really well. So if that offense can start being productive, it's, look out because they're combining, both aspects of football and playing really well.
Yeah, another impressive win for Rock Ridge is they're really, it seems like they're starting to hit their stride a little bit, I would say. Especially coming off a week where they had a forfeit when they didn't play last week.
Yep.
And you never know how you're going to, come back from that. So good to see that they are really, they haven't let that Princeton loss, kind of overtake their season in a game where they played really well. And I guess that probably should have been an indicator of how they're playing now because they played Princeton better than anybody else has so far this year. So the way that they're being dynamic and scoring in multiple ways with multiple people, very encouraging as they continue to move on and they themselves make yet another playoff push.
Yeah, Mitch, going way back to week 1 in that Princeton game. I mean, the score ended up being, not close, but through halftime, they were hanging around with them. They really were doing some things well. And I know that doesn't get you anywhere necessarily, but I do think long-term, it kind of shows that the defense is there for Rock Ridge. We know they have the high-powered offense. If they continue to show it like this, it's going to be a good year for the Rockets and continue to be a good year for the Rockets. On the Erie Prophetstown side of things, Jace Grunder, a name we're really familiar with, had a kickoff return for a touchdown. The Panthers also recorded a pick 6. So Erie Prophetstown right now sitting at 2-2 on the year.
Yeah.
See where their season will continue to go from here. Mitch, moving down the way in the Three Rivers Athletic Conference, Monmouth Roseville gets the 51-20 win over Sherrard. CJ Johnson ran the ball 17 times for 156 yards, 4 touchdowns, plus he had a 72-yard interception return for a touchdown. Silas Braun continues to play well, 116 yards rushing with a rushing touchdown. Mitch, they didn't need to pass very much in this one. I don't think they passed hardly at all, but they didn't really need to. They were getting the job done on the ground, and they get the win here.
Yeah, and good to see them. They've had a bit of a start to the season that maybe we didn't expect. So good to see them get back on track here with again, the great play of CJ Johnson and Silas Braun, like you mentioned. So does this give them a little bit more of a push now to get back on track like they want it to be with the 5 games left that they have?
Yeah, Mitch, we talk about those X factor games. they got 2 in a row coming up. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But when you look at Rock Ridge next week, followed by Orion, those are 2 games that are going to go a long way in deciding some playoff fate for these teams, I believe. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, we got one more game to discuss. Kewanee gets the big win, 40-7 over Bureau Valley. Boilermakers scored on their first 4 drives. They built a 26-point lead en route to the victory. Alex Duarte and Garrett Pettis each scored a couple of touchdowns to lead the Boilermakers. One highlight for the Storm, quarterback Bryce Helms threw to Eli Addig, who caught a ball, beat out some defenders, and went 96 yards for the touchdown. So credit to him on that one. A great highlight, huge run for him. Wasn't enough in this one as Kewanee looked really good, got back into the win column there. Well, Mitch, we want to jump into week 5 here?
Yeah, let's look at these matchups here. A big one historically, obviously the big rivalry, Kewanee going to Princeton. Maybe this year. Again, you never know what's going to happen, but Princeton has just looked so much better than anybody that they've played in. Kewanee maybe having a down year, but again, rivalry game, you never know what's going to happen. Mendota going to Hall. Sherrard goes to Morrison. Bureau Valley will host Newman. Orion, coming off their bye week, will travel to Erie Prophetstown. Monmouth Roseville hosts Rock Ridge, and St. Bede, it would appear that they have a bye week.
Yep. Well, I'm going to go with, the games that stand out to me. I'm obviously Kewanee Princeton, like you referenced. It's a rivalry game. But what about Orion at Erie Prophetstown and Rock Ridge at Monmouth Roseville?
Yeah.
2 games that really you're going to start to see some separation in that Three Rivers Rock side of the division. You're really going to start to see which teams are moving up to towards the top of the standings and who's going to stay near the middle. I think these are some separation here. What do you like?
Yeah, I like those 2, Rock Ridge and Monmouth Roseville, the top 2 teams in the Rock right now. I'm gonna stick to what I said earlier. I'm looking at the Morrison game. Can they get their 3rd win? And 3rd straight win, something that they might not have had for a couple of seasons. So certainly a winnable game there in Sherrard, the way that Morrison's been playing. Again, battle tested. That's gonna only help them and to come off an emotional win against Hall last week. So looking forward to seeing if the Mustangs can pull off 3 straight here.
Yeah, man, I was looking earlier today and I thought I wanted to do Kewanee at Princeton, but then as we kept reading through games, I thought, well, maybe I want to do Geneseo and Sterling, but now I'm looking at Rock Ridge and Monmouth Roseville and thinking maybe I want to do that game. So many potential games here. I really think the Rock Ridge Monmouth Roseville game is one that's going to be good. I want to see if Rock Ridge can continue to play solid football on both sides of the ball. And for Monmouth Roseville, I think we need to see them play a full game at their full potential, right? We've talked so much about them to start the season, and they've made it to 2-2 now, and they still have the Riverdale game on their schedule. So if that's going to be a win for them, potentially, they already have 3 wins, really, if they're going to go with that forfeit win. But I really want to see Monmouth Roseville play a full game. And they did. They played well against Sherrard, but now this one's going to be a tough test against Rock Ridge.
Yeah, if you count that Port Byron bye as their 4th win, they've got to get at least 1 win from Rock Ridge, Orion, Erie Prophetstown, or Princeton. So a pretty good lineup there. But again, if Monmouth Roseville can play the way that they did this past week, hopefully that gives them some momentum. And then one of those games, if not 2 of those games, will be winnable.
Well, so they have 3 wins right now. They were 2
I'm sorry.
2.
Yes, I was counting that. Okay, so so they need. Yeah, I'm sorry. They do need 3 wins out of those then. So again, hopefully they use this as kind of a jump off point to get there.
Yep. Let's move into the Lincoln Trail Conference. Mitch, the game I was at, a non-conference game for Anawan Wethersfield. They go on the road to Ottawa Marquette. They fall 24-7. Mitch, this was a matchup of teams that I thought were 2 of the better teams in Class 1A. I had them in my top 10 rankings for NUICfootball.com. Crusaders come away with a victory in this one. I think it's going to be 2 1A playoff teams. These are teams that we're going to see down the road in the playoffs. And so this was a matchup with a lot of playoff implications. Marquette took an early lead and they controlled this one throughout. What really impressed me, though, was the Crusaders' defense. They limited the Titans' offense to 45 yards. Mitch, we've seen how dynamic this A&W offense can be, and Marquette really seemed to have an answer for anything they tried to do. It was really impressive.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head when you said that this was, a really good matchup. But two playoff teams, right? Anna Weathersfield's been playing really well this year, and obviously so is Marquette. So, a great job by Coach Jobst in this one. As they continue, again, you were there. You're gonna have more insight than I will. But Alex Graham looks like he continued to play well again this week, and they continue to roll.
Yeah, Alex Graham is fun to watch at quarterback because he's almost like an extra coach on the field. He's almost like rolling out of the pocket and almost like directing traffic. And even when he's on the sidelines, you can tell he's talking to coaches and he's really kind of, scheming or game planning or talking about what he's seeing on the field. And that's such a valuable asset to have from the quarterback position, to be able to kind of call plays or learn and see adjustments in real time.
Yeah.
But, getting back to the gameplay here overall, I thought the Titans played pretty well defensively. They limited big plays for the most part. But man, Coach Jobst to the Crusaders really put on a clinic in ball control and time of possession. They held the ball for almost 33 minutes of this game.
Out of what, 40, right?
Yeah, they just really grinded out the clock. So Caden Eiler had 2 interceptions, and the biggest play of the game for the Crusaders, he hauled in a 45-yard pass from Alex Graham. So overall, a really impressive effort from the Crusaders. But on the flip side, I think that Anawan Weathersfield, they still have everything in front of them. They got, every conference game left out there. They'll do a lot of damage in the Lincoln Trail. I think this was just a really good playoff type atmosphere and a playoff preview of what we could potentially see down the road.
Well, the Armstrongs were in the house, so they had to put on a show and then leave it at that, I think. And that was the reason. That was the key to the game.
It was fun. It was a fun night. So, Mitch, let's move into Stark County and Elmwood Brimfield. Mitch, This is one of those games we talked about to start the show. This is one of those huge games that makes a big difference down the road in the standings. Stark County gets the 31-22 win over a previously unbeaten Elmwood Brimfield team. So now Stark County moves to 3-1 on the season. Mitch, the Rebels knock off Elmwood Brimfield. It has to be what you'd call an upset. Trojans are a 3A program, not to mention they were a 6-win playoff team a year ago. So great win for Stark County and head coach Jade Nord.
Yeah, this is impressive. Coming back from tough loss last week to a really good Knoxville program. But I look at the schedule ahead for Stark County and playing the way that they did against Elmwood here. They're going to be a playoff team, and that's really exciting for the Rebels. Rushed for almost 400 yards in this one, Greg. Really just took it to the Trojans. They thought they'd have to go in the air a little bit more, but credit to the Rebels line and that rushing attack for doing a lot of work and allowing that rushing attack to do its job. So they didn't have to go into the air, so they would be able to control the clock and ultimately win this in a 9-point game.
Yeah, I love that the linemen, the big boys doing work up front. They got a shout out from SC Rebels football, the Twitter account for Stark County. So it's Stotler, Price, Baxter, Hess, and Merriman. I'm not talking about a law firm, but I'm talking about the offensive line for Stark County. They led the way up front. An impressive effort behind Ruertz. Had 181 yards and 3 touchdowns. Henry, 116 yards and a touchdown. And Orwig, 93 yards and a touchdown. So, just overall, man, talk about an effort on the ground. It's just job well done for Stark County. And Mitch, like you said, looking down their schedule, being at 3 wins now, I think Stark County has what it takes to get back to the playoffs. We'll talk about them a little bit later when we start talking about, our playoff projections looking down the way, but they've certainly put themselves in a good spot right now.
Yep. Again, had they lost this game, they certainly had some more work to do. But as you just said, they're really in a good spot. They're playing United, having a down year, so I could see that being their 4th win. So yeah, exciting times there in Rebel Country.
Yep. Let's move along to Knoxville getting the win over United 44-28. Blue Bullets remain undefeated on the season with the win. Bo Honeycutt threw for 3 touchdowns, 2 of them to Braden Downs, another one to Sawyer Tucker. Also, Jackson Johnson continues to play well, 149 yards and 3 touchdowns. Nolan McClay, 7 tackles. Will Shreves keeps getting it done on defense. He had another interception. That's his 3rd of the season. Next week, Mitch, is a big non-conference game.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that one in a little bit. That one's one I'm excited for.
Yeah, that's going to be some star power there. We've liked both of those teams for the past couple of seasons, and they're both having good years this year as well. So, as exciting as non-conference matchups that we've had to talk about all season, this is certainly going to be one of them.
Yeah, so it'll be Knoxville and Dupec in a non-conference game next week. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's get through the rest of the action in the Lincoln Trail. Rova Williamsfield gets back on track. They defeat Princeville 30-18. Cougars moved to 3-1 on the season. They got a big showdown coming up in week 5 against, guess who? The next team we're going to talk about, Mercer County. Yep. Mercer County, the Golden Eagles get the 59-7 win over A-Town. Mercer County scored 9 touchdowns on their way to the victory. Colby Cox ran for 350 yards as the Golden Eagles improved to 3-1. Side note, Mitch, they beat Farmington to start the year, who has now since gone 3-0, rolling over teams in the Prairie Land. They're now averaging a victory margin of 54-7 in those 3 wins. So we thought that was a really legit win when Mercer County got it.
Right.
It's certainly proving to be that so far.
A really good season, that they had that loss to Knoxville, but in the other 3 games, they haven't let up more than 8 points. So, looking at their schedule, they still got some heavy hitters. They've got Rova left. They've got Stark County. They've got Weathersfield, plus a crossover game with Prairie Central, who's undefeated. So Mercer County playing well. They're going to need to keep playing well with what they've got left. Yep.
Let's look at the slate in week 5 for the Lincoln Trail Conference. The big one we referenced already, Mercer County at Rova Williamsfield, Anawan Weathersfield at A-Town, Stark County at United. Lewiston is going to Princeville in a non-conference game or in a crossover game with the Prairie Land. And the non-conference game, the big one, Dupec at Knoxville. Mitch, that game just really intrigues me.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing Jackson Johnson versus AJ Mulcahy, and again all the star players that we've talked about on both of those teams. Two really good teams on offense, 2 teams that can knock you down both ways. Knoxville maybe a bit more of a running team, but certainly Dupec has that ability as well. So, and maybe that's the kicker, right? Can Dupec's passing ability maybe be the thing that puts them over the edge? Knoxville hasn't really shown that. They haven't needed to.
Yeah.
So maybe that's going to be an X factor here, where the Rivermen take it to the air.
But I look at, Bo Honeycutt for Knoxville.
Sure.
That's 3 touchdowns.
I'm not giving him enough credit. I get it. I will say yes. Overall, in the past couple of years, we've seen Dupec spread it out and throw a lot more. I think the makeup of Knoxville has changed a little bit. We've talked about how much they ran the ball a year ago, but now they have gone to the air a little bit more. And I think maybe Honeycutt's abilities have dictated that to some extent. So this could be, a great game. I guess the question becomes who has answers on defense, which one of these defense steps up and is able to make adjustments and figure out, we've talked about the 2 really good offenses here for both teams, which defense is able to kind of figure it out quicker and make those stops. Yeah, I think the same thing too in the Rova Mercer County game. For Rova, we've talked about them being a bit of a younger team, kind of junior led. Can Riley Danner, can Jack Dotzel, can they really get things going for this offense? Because we've talked about how they're 3-1. Maybe they had a couple of easier opponents. They had that tough loss to Macomb. So can they step up here in another big game for them? And Mercer County, like we just talked about, had a really impressive game on the ground here this week with Colby Cox and as they've done all year. So this is a big opportunity for Rova, I think, playing at home. It's to maybe prove that they can compete with the big boys here in the conference. So yeah, these are intriguing, matchups across the whole conference. I think, Weathersfield should pick up a win against A-Town, Stark County against United. And again, adds more to the intrigue as the season rolls on.
Yeah, when you start looking down the way, this Rova-Williamsfield schedule, they have, like we've talked about, Mercer County. That game, I think, becomes really big because you still got Stark County left sitting at 3-1. You have Anno on Weathersfield sitting at 3-1 in week 8. And week 9, you still have Knoxville hanging out there. So They have a lot of heavy hitters coming at the end of their schedule. So if they're going to make that playoff push, Mitch, that drive for 5,
right,
they got to grab, one of these, 2 of these wins here.
Yeah, and we should mention too, they've already eclipsed their win total from last year, right?
Yep.
So this has been such a good season for Rova. They'll probably pick up that 4th win against United, be my guess looking ahead. So yeah, if they can win one of those 4, and certainly they're absolutely possible. Mercer County will be a good test for that and a good measuring stick, I think.
Yeah, a lot of intrigue there in the Lincoln Trail. We'll certainly be talking more about it next week because the games will keep getting interesting. So
right. Yep.
Let's move into the Northwest Upstate Illini. Mitch, another one of those huge games, a game that really kind of caught me, by surprise, if I'm being honest. Dakota knocks off Forreston 34-28. What a game, Mitch. This might go down as one of our game of the year candidates at the end of the year. Did you see the highlights on Twitter? It was a thrilling finish there for Dakota.
Yeah, this was one of the games when I got back to my hotel room on Friday that I saw not only that it was final, but how it became final. And man, what a win for the Indians and for Coach Dan Sheets. I would say that I didn't expect this, right? I would have thought Forreston would have beaten Dakota. So it's they looked like a Dakota team of old, right? So good to see that. They had the all black on, which I hadn't seen before. So again, great win. But yeah, Greg, run us through here. What happened in the 4th quarter?
Yeah, so let's go through the game action. In the 4th quarter, Dakota's Caden Niedermeyer scores to make it 26-20. They could not convert on the 2-point conversion. Forreston would respond. Johnny Cobbler, your boy, runs it in.
Yep.
They do convert the 2-point conversion. So they're up 28-26 late 4th quarter. Indians go on to respond. They get the game-winning touchdown. It's a pass from Niedermeyer to fullback Thomas Bowman. And now when I say it's a pass, I want to make sure I clarify the Bowman caught the ball and then he did a lot of the work on this play. I mean, he blasts through a defender, carries another one across the goal line. Mitch, it's just that play that you love to see, like that heart, that determination. It's everything you love to see, culminating with the explosion of emotion, the cheering, the players going nuts. This is a program in Dakota that's been through a lot in the last 2-3 years. To see them be rewarded on the field like that, man, it's what it's all about, right? That's a program changing type of win.
Yeah, great scenes there for Dakota. And watching the games tonight, the Buffalo Bills must have been watching too, because they had a touchdown pass to the fullback tonight. So you never know who's watching. But yeah, the play to Bowman, it really was. He had a lot of ground to cover and just bulldozed his way in and was not going to be denied. So yeah, the type of play that you would expect from Dakota, right? And so good to see them get the upset win here. Good to see them kind of position themselves a little bit better in the NUIC here midway through.
Yeah, Mitch, we'll talk a little bit more about it down the road, but similar to Stark County getting their 3rd win, I think this is a really big, really important win for Dakota when you look down their schedule in terms of pushing towards the playoffs. So
I think they can get to 6. I really do. And possibly even 7. So they've already got Lee Win off their schedule. They've already got Forreston off their schedule. So obviously big games upcoming, but the way that Dakota played here could serve them well. Yeah.
Credit again to Dakota. There's some of those games you see every few years that feel like a real momentum swing for a program. this felt like that type of win for this Dakota program.
Yeah, and like we just talked about with Rova, Dakota has now more wins than they did last year already. So again, I hope we go back, or we'll go back to the season preview and list off the teams that we thought would have more wins than they did last year. And I hope that we talked about some of these teams, because some of them are coming to fruition even through the first 4 weeks. So cool to see. Good to see.
Yep. Well, let's keep moving down the way here. Lena Winslow, they continue to roll. They get the win over West Carroll 70-0. Another shutout in the Northwest Upstate Illini. Dupec gets the 43-0 win over Eastland Pearl City. Dupec and Lena Winslow both have big matchups coming up in week 5. We'll get to those in a minute. Very intriguing matchups coming down the way for them. Galena gets the win 40-8 over Stockton. Galena moves to 2-2 with the win. They've had an interesting start to this season. Their 2 losses coming to NUIC heavy hitters, Fulton and Lena Winslow. So I think there's a lot to learn in the next few weeks, and we'll talk about some of those games in a minute, but that's one of those matchups, or one of those teams, Mitch, that's sitting at 2 wins. Yeah. Can they get to 5 or potentially 6,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It looks like I can foresee 4, and then I think it will be either an upset win that they're certainly capable of, but again, the way that they played Stockton, maybe they catch Forston off guard this week, right? They've certainly played well this year in games. So Galena's going to be one to watch here with what they have left. Can they get to 5? It's certainly possible. So yeah, this will be a team to keep on the radar and hopefully get back to the playoffs again, like they did last year.
Yep. One more game to talk about in the Northwest Upstate Illini for the 11-man ranks. Fulton falls to Muskegon Catholic Central 7-6 on Saturday afternoon. Yeah. Defensive battle goes the way of Muskegon. The Crusaders scored in the first quarter. The Steamers were able to keep them out of the end zone the rest of the way. Fulton would add 2 field goals from Andy Quinage, a kicker we've really been impressed with this season. He had a field goal from 23 yards and from 37 yards. That would make it a 1-point game, but that would be as close as they would come. They would fall just short. Mitch, overall, I think for a bigger school coming from Muskegon, I'm impressed with Fulton's efforts here. It was a rainy kind of, not ideal field conditions, but they still really battled a tough team, a team that has a lot of pedigree in Michigan, a big school in Michigan. They played really well. They showed well for themselves.
Yeah, couldn't get much going on the ground, which is unlike Fulton. But again, that kind of gives credit to Muskegon. But they did outgain the Crusaders 137-17 through the air. So they had a bunch of turnovers too. But I should say they forced a handful of turnovers, but they also committed some as well. So again, a tight battle here for Fulton. I don't, my prospects on their season don't change at all within the conference. So again, one of those games where in the long look at things that might not matter too much, and hopefully serves as a experience builder, for them as they have a pretty manageable schedule the rest of the way. Obviously, this is going to be, we'll talk about here in a minute, with Lena, going to be a huge game for both of those programs. But for Fulton, their path to the playoff is pretty clear. And just it'll be how good of a standing will they have there in 1A.
Yeah, I think, like we've referenced with other teams, you lose a non-conference game here, but you still have everything in front of you. You can still run the table in the Northwest Upstate Illini, potentially. I mean, You still have a big one, a really big one coming up this week. We'll talk about it in a minute here. Yeah. But you've knocked off Dupec. So you look down the way, there's potential you can, still finish with a really strong record and put yourself in a great spot. And overall, at the end of the day, this Fulton team really challenged themselves in this matchup. And they played well, and they fell a little bit short. I think that experience against a big, tough football team will pay off dividends come playoff time. Well, Mitch, let's look at week 5. Dakota goes on the road to Eastland Pearl City. Forston is hosting Galena. The big one, Fulton at Lena Winslow. Another big one, non-conference action, Dupec at Knoxville, and then West Carroll at Stockton. Mitch, in theory, if you were coming back and you're going to one game, are you picking Fulton at Lena Winslow or Dupec at Knoxville? You only get one.
I would go to Lena. I think that is really a heavy hitter, a matchup of this conference season probably for the NUIC. As we mentioned, Fulton already having knocked off Dupec, the reigning champions. So now they're kind of trying to cement their place there. We always talk about Lena as being the top of the conference, even though they didn't win the conference last year, but they've certainly proven to, cement their place as not only one of the top teams in the conference, one of the top teams in the state. So if Fulton wants to recover from that loss and continue to make that push for a conference crown, there's no better way to do it than this week and beat Lena. But looking at these teams on a season, Lena scored 224 points this year. They've only given up 30. Have they played the meat of their schedule yet? No. Has that really mattered in seasons past? Not really either. But Fulton's sitting right behind them with only 41, points allowed. So, can Fulton? I think the bigger question will be, can Fulton stop Lena's attack? Because no one has this year, right? They've scored 60, 48, 46, and then 70. And again, that's including 48 against a good Dakota team. So if Fulton can stop Lena, that'll make it a little bit of a matchup. I love what Lena's doing on defense. So this will be a good game, a good opportunity for Fulton to really, again, make a name for themselves, make a push to be that conference champion.
Depending on which side you fall, is it better to be Fulton and be really tested in the week before you go up against maybe your biggest matchup of the year in Lena Winslow? Or is it better if you're Lena Winslow and you had a week that wasn't maybe as challenging? Guys probably got some rest in theory, and now you're gearing up for this big matchup. Is there a chance that Fulton can really come out, smack Lena in the mouth right away because they're playing so fired up? Here's the thing, though. I know Lena Winslow too well, and I don't think a Coach Aaron team is going to be pushed around early on in a game like this. They're just not. They're going to be ready to play. There's too much experience on this Lena Winslow team to not be ready for a big game like this.
Yeah, and I've talked to my people up there. They're certainly aware of what Fulton's been doing, so they're going to be ready for this game. There's no question about it. But as you said, Fulton's battle tested. So if this is a close game, does that help them? Or does Lena, with the way that they're playing, not even allow it to get close? So yeah, really looking forward to that one. That would be the game I would go see if I was back.
Yeah, I think that's the game you'd pick, and I might pick it as well because it's a conference game. But man, we can't forget this Dupec at Knoxville. This is a really intriguing non-conference matchup. Credit to both schools for making it happen. I think it's a great test for Knoxville. I think it really bulks up their schedule. When you look down the road, they want to be battle tested come playoff time because they're one of the bigger schools in the Lincoln Trail. So I think they want to be in a position where they've seen some heavy hitters going into the playoffs. This is a good test for them. Win or lose, like we've discussed in other matchups, this is still a good test for Knoxville. Man, I think that they could, they're playing well enough that they could knock off Dupec if they play a great brand of football. But also, man, Dupec is a very dynamic offense and they play really well. So this Knoxville team will have to be ready for that.
Yeah, and just the other thing too with Forest and Galena, two really good teams I think that have been playing, have played well this year. Two teams that are both 2-2, who can again climb that ladder above the other, get that third win. Because looking at what both teams have the rest of the way, a win here is pivotal for both of them. So in terms of getting into the playoffs, so can Forest and kind of rebound from that tough loss to Dakota? Can Galena keep that? We've seen when they play their tough games this year, they don't show up as well. But coming off of a 40-8 win, we'll see if they can repeat.
Yeah, I think that Forest and Galena game becomes really critical for both teams. And I look at Dakota, you're going on the road to Eastland Pearl City a team that has struggled this year, but they're certainly hungry for a win. They'd love to play the role as spoiler. I think if you're Dakota, you can't fall asleep now. You got to get this win. You got to move one more step in the right direction. And, you can't overlook anybody at this point in the Northwest Upstate Illini. So, man, Mitch, that's a loaded slate. And there's going to keep being matchups like that down the way. But this is a fun week of football.
Yeah, all the games that we've talked about and even the 8-man games coming up, all really, really intriguing. It's going to be a fun week to talk about.
Yep. Well, let's move into those 8-man ranks like you talked about. The big one in 8-man football, Amboy falls 10 points short to Milford Cisna Park, 40-30 in a non-conference game in 8-man football. Amboy trailed by 18 points with 2 minutes and 28 seconds left in the third quarter. They rallied within 4 with 8 minutes left in the game, but ultimately fall to Milford Cisna Park. Mitch, this Milford team has looked really good this year, and we were really high on Amboy, but I give credit. Milford Cisna Park came up to the Northwest Upstate Illini, and they came away with a big win.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at, and we're going to get into the results here more, but looking at teams that have been ranked number 1, in 8-man so far, I'm really looking forward to the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
We're going to see rematches, I think, throughout the rounds. And I think there are 4 teams that could potentially win. You could make a case for 4 teams to win the 8-man championship this year. So when they play each other in the regular season, they just go back and forth. It just makes the playoffs all that more enticing. So, Amboy coming off that just crazy win, over Milledgeville last week. But Milford Cisna Park, like you said, just kind of said, hey, we're here too, as they're undefeated, and a nice win here for them.
Yeah, Brennan Blaine continued to look good for the Clippers. He had a 45-yard touchdown reception. He also recovered a fumble in the fourth to set up a 1-yard touchdown from Landon Welchel. And that was what pulled Amboy within 4 points. But Milford Cisna Park was too much in this one. So another very intriguing matchup, Mitch. We'll keep moving down the way.
Yep.
Milledgeville gets the win over Polo in the Blacktop rivalry, I believe it's called. Did we figure out the official name there?
I think so. I think that's right.
Yeah, Milledgeville gets the win 54-38. Early in this one, Polo jumped out to the lead. Caden Webster connecting with Avery Ganoble on a 63-yard touchdown pass midway through the first quarter. Then it was Brock Soltow sprinting 73 yards on a direct snap with 2:44 left in the half. Marcos took a 16-6 lead into the break, but the Missiles would flip that script in the second. They score on their first 6 times they possessed the ball in the second half, so they really came alive. Colton Wilk finished with 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 6 catches for 85 yards and 2 screen pass touchdowns. Connor Nye passed for 194 yards and 4 scores. He was 5 for 5, 130 yards and 4 touchdowns to 3 different receivers after halftime. So Connor Nye, a quarterback we've been impressed with, very good in this one. He also ran for 93 yards and a touchdown. Kaysen Johnson, a name we've called out, Connor Johnson, both had touchdown receptions. On the flip side, for Polo, the names we're familiar with. Brock Soltow finished 185 yards, 3 touchdowns. He also was 2 for 4, 29 yards and a touchdown through the air. Avery Ganoble finished with 14 rushes and 44 yards, along with a 63-yard touchdown catch. So an impressive win for Milledgeville. This Polo team, I think they're battling in the NUIC. Yep. They're sitting right now at 2-2, but I think they're a battle-tested 2-2. Milledgeville comes away with the win. They're now sitting actually at 4-1. They already have a forfeit win down the road for them. Okay. So they're actually sitting in a really good spot. Mitch, let's move down the way to another undefeated team that continues to look impressive. West Central gets the 68-14 win over Peoria Heights. Like I said, the Heat moved to 4-0. Caden Drosty, 5 rushes, 123 yards. Bruce Bigger had 3 catches for 52 yards. On the defensive side, Mikhail West with 9 tackles, 3 of them coming for loss. Mitch, we talk a lot about the NUIC when it comes to 8-man football, but this West Central Heat team could be a real serious contender. And we're going to learn more as the season goes on. They'll be tested down the way. They still have Milledgeville and Amboy on their schedule, 2 teams we just talked about. So a lot of fun 8-man football with those 3 down the way.
Right. I should have said there's 5 teams, because I don't think I was counting one of the combination of West Central, Polo, Milledgeville, Milford, Cessna Park, and Amboy. Because again, like we talked about, 5 really, really good teams. And as they continue to battle in the regular season, it's only going to make the playoffs all that more intriguing.
Yep. Let's run through some more 8-man scores from last week. Ridgewood continues to look impressive. They get the 44-15 win. I believe, Mitch, their only loss this year was to that West Central team. So they're still looking very good.
Yep.
Hanover River Ridge gets the 46-42 win over Freeport-Aquin. That's a nice win for River Ridge.
Yeah.
Hiawatha gets the 60-40 win over Orangeville. South Beloit gets the 40-20 win over Alden Hebron. And Metro East Lutheran gets the 42-16 win over Galva. So, Mitch, let's look into the Week 5 schedule for 8-man football. Amboy is at Orangeville on Saturday. Ridgewood is at Aquin. That's an interesting non-conference crossover game there in 8-man. Rockford Christian Life is at River Ridge. Milledgeville at Decatur Lutheran. Polo at Kirkwood Hiawatha. And Flanagan Cornell Woodland at West Central. So, Mitch, where does your head go here for the 8-man ranks and what we got coming up?
Well, I want to see how Milledgeville responds. With coming off of the Amboy loss and then a nice win over Polo. I want to see if they can keep that going. I believe they are my number 1 team this week in 8-man, so it'd be the third different number 1 team here in 8-man ranks. So I think that's where I would go, just to see if they can keep playing well, like the names that you said, Connor Nye, Kaysen, and Connor Johnson. So I think I'd go Milledgeville here.
Yeah, well, and that's a big matchup. They're going on the road to Decatur Lutheran, who's also sitting at 4-0 now. So, you talked about West Central looking good, outside of the Northwest Upstate Illini 8-man ranks. This Decatur Lutheran team, along with Milford Cessna Park, who got the big win over Amboy, there's some teams still with an undefeated record in 8-man that I want to see them down the way here in the next few weeks really test themselves and see where they end up. Because I think, there's a lot to be sorted out. And ultimately, Mitch, like you said, the 8-man playoffs are really setting themselves up to be a lot of fun. A lot of matchups that could be 50-50, toss a coin, see where it lands. So, Ridgewood, like I said, Ridgewood at Aquin, that game kind of intrigues me a little bit. And, can Amboy bounce back? They're going on the road to Orangeville. Orangeville's been struggling this year, but that's a program with a little bit of pedigree the last few years. So can Amboy bounce back there? Well, Mitch, looking around, we've talked about, that playoff push, or that we're on the path to the playoffs here, at least that drive for 5. Looking around the state, read an article from Steve Susi at Friday Night Drive. Only 74 teams remain undefeated. And that's actually a number that's lower than what we usually have after 4 weeks of a season.
Okay.
So ultimately, what does that mean? That means with a smaller group of teams at the end of the year that are going to be potentially undefeated or with 1 loss, these postseason brackets become, less, teams stacked at top, but a lot of teams bunched in the middle, which I think that makes for some really good, intriguing playoff matchups.
Yeah, I think as we've kind of talked about on this episode through this week, we've seen a lot of teams that are sitting at 3-1 or 2-2 that have to play other 2-2 teams or other 3-1 teams still throughout the season. So specifically in the NUIC and in the Lincoln Trail, I think you're going to see a lot of those teams that might be in the 6-3 or 5-4 range that are going to get in. And as you said, that's just going to make it all that more intriguing in the playoffs, because they're quality teams that, are playing other quality teams. So, interesting that there's only 74 teams left, but again, I think in the long run, that's going to make for a pretty exciting playoff.
Yep. Well, Mitch, before we wrap up this episode, I wanted to have a little fun discussion here. When we start looking at where we're at through 4 weeks of the season, I want you to name off some teams, from all our conferences. We can go down the list. Teams with 2 wins or less right now that you think are going to make the playoffs.
Okay.
So I guess we'll start in the Western Big Six. And I will say it might sound a little crazy. I don't think it's impossible for United Township to run the table. I don't think it would be easy. I'm not saying it's likely, but I'm not saying it's impossible either. I think there's a lot of talent in this United Township team. If some things fall their way, if they play really good football, you got to play nearly flawless football. But I think that's the path they're on right now. If they, that's the shot they have. Other teams, maybe more realistic. What do you see in teams that are left in the Western Big Six that have that playoff push?
Yeah, I don't know that I would go that far as you just went. I certainly think Rock Island, the way that they have played, obviously coming off of a loss against Moline. But they've got UT and Galesburg coming up. I think those are winnable games, but then they'd have to win one between Sterling, Geneseo, and Quincy. So possible, yeah. Outside of that, I think we're going to see again. This is add this into what we were just saying. Teams that are going to we'll probably get a handful of teams at that 5-win mark, and they'll get in their respective classes because of the games that are left on the slates. You could make a case for either team in that matchup to win. So we're going to see a lot of good matchups starting this week and every week here in the Western Big Six. So if you're going UT, I'm going to say Rock Island.
Yeah, and I will admit, like it sounds crazy, and I'm not saying it's something that I expect to happen.
Yeah,
but I'm saying I don't think it's impossible because Mitch, when you go back a month and a half ago, United Township was a team that we talked about being at the top end of the standings potentially. And if things went right, we thought they could win the Western Big Six. I mean, we thought they were one of the teams in the mix that had enough talent to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so that being said, the talent hasn't gone anywhere. It's the same team that we were talking about having that potential. Now they're really behind the 8 ball now. So it's not easy, but I felt like I needed to call it out that again, getting back to what I said a long time ago at the beginning, this is not the same United Township team that you saw 5-6 years ago that was 0-4. It's a much different makeup, a much different culture. I think they have a chance to do something really incredible here. And it would be a hell of a story to sit and watch. Right. So I'm just interested to see if we can sit back and watch it. So
we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. They got to do that. They got to win this week. So we'll see.
I would say, obviously, we would learn a lot more in the next 2 weeks, mainly even this week, because like you said, I think Rock Island's that team sitting at 2 wins that this becomes obviously a huge game for them as well. So, well, Mitch, what do you see in the Three Rivers? We'll move on to there.
I'm going to go to the Mississippi here, Greg, to start. I think Mendota can do it. I think Mendota can get 5 wins. They've got winnable games coming up against Hall and Sherrard that could get them to 4. And then they'd have to win one over Kewanee, Newman, or St. Bede. I think they've got a shot to do it. Newman again 2-2. Bureau Valley this week. They've still got Hall and Mendota on the schedule. I think they can get to 5 wins. Going to the Rock, or we're just in the Rock, going to the Mississippi. Or was I just in the Mississippi? Yeah, I was just in Mississippi. Sorry.
Now I'm confused.
It used to be so much easier when it was just one conference, right?
Yeah.
Or one division. And again, it just kind of seems that this is the theme, that there's a lot of teams that I think are going to end up at 5 and 4 just because they just play one another, and you could make a note, or you could see either team win. An Erie at 2-2, right? They've got winnable games coming up. Monmouth, Roosevelt 3-2. Never mind. Morrison 2-2. Orion 2-2. I think there's a path to 5 for a handful of teams here, as we typically see. We in in traditional years in the Three Rivers, we do see 5-6 teams get into their respective classes. So I think we're going to see that again.
I think for me, the team that stands out in the Three Rivers is Newman. I think that's a team that's at 2-2 now that will find themselves with 5 wins at least before the end of the year, before the end of the regular season. I think a huge matchup down the way becomes Orion and Morrison. We're both at 2 wins. And like you referenced, the other team in the mix there, Erie Prophetstown. If they play well, Mitch, you could have a huge rivalry game between Morrison and Erie Prophetstown in week 9.
Yeah. Right.
Both of those teams could be in that position to be looking for that 5th win. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Was that a rival for you? Was Morrison Erie Prophetstown? Was that one of your rivals? Being that it's pretty close proximity.
Yeah, I mean, probably behind Newman and Fulton for sure. The Erie games were always close. I think historically we had a better record, but those games were always close. So that's fair enough to call them a rivalry game.
Yeah. So it gets a little tricky when you look at the Lincoln Trail Conference.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Nobody with 2 wins right now.
Right.
So do you see Princeville or Abingdon Avon or United making that playoff push? I think that's where the question becomes. And I'm not sure I see it because I think that those teams at the top of the standings have really proven themselves.
Right. It's just the quality there between the top 5, right, so far. They've kind of bridged that gap there. So if we just narrow it down to those 5 teams, I think Knoxville is going to be a lock at this point. But then you've got 4 teams sitting at 3-1, majority of whom have to play each other. Some of them play each other this week. So maybe we'll have a better kind of understanding of what's left after week 5 here, because this is where it gets interesting in Lincoln Trail as they start to play those games. And there's going to be a lot of shuffling here in the standings.
Yeah, there is a lot to be decided in the Lincoln Trail, and we will soon find out. Well, Mitch, let's go to the Northwest Upstate Illini before we wrap things up. You got Forreston sitting at 2-2.
Yep.
I think that's got to be the team that stands out. And then Galena, and they play this week. So I think, Mitch, by the time we talk next, we will have a much better, clear picture on which one of these teams is kind of headed in the right direction. I think this is a huge game for both those teams.
Yeah. I think even looking at Dakota here, I think they're gonna get in with 3 wins right now with what they have left. I can already see 2 more wins on their schedule at least. Again, we're in a little bit of that same predicament where some of these teams are going to play each other that are kind of in that mid-tier, like you said, Galena, this week with Forreston. Fortunately, you don't see it happening with West Carroll or with EPC. So yeah, I think Galena is the one that stands out, right? Can they get the win, an upset win potentially against Forreston this week? Then they got EPC and West Carroll still on the schedule. So there's your 5 right there. So if they're going to do it, I think getting a win this week would put them there.
Yep, I agree. Quickly looking at the 8-man division, we already kind of referenced Polo sitting there at a 2-2 team.
Yeah,
man, they're better than a 2-2 football team because they've just played a tough NUIC schedule.
Right.
I think you look down the way, I think there's still wins, plenty of wins down the way for this Polo Marcos team. I think that they're at 2-2, but they're going to make a playoff push for sure.
Yeah. And again, kind of like what we talked about, I'm really excited for the playoffs in 8-man. Obviously they do things a little bit differently than what the 11-man does. So we're going to see a lot of rematches in the playoffs. And wins that occur in the regular season and performances that occur in the regular season might not always be indicative of what's going to happen in the playoffs. So, looking forward to how the 8-man is going to play out here. As we mentioned, there's 5 really, really good teams, and who will come out on top is to be seen.
Yeah, I think one more to mention: Hanover River Ridge. They come off the big win over Freeport-Ackland. What about them? They're 1-3 right now. They got Rockford Christian Life next week. They got Alden Hebron, who sits at 2-2. They have a huge matchup against Polo, and then they end their season with Milledgeville and Orangeville.
Right.
So I think it's not easy. They're behind the 8 ball here a little bit, but it's not impossible either. They could get a few wins there if they keep playing well. So that's one to watch for maybe.
Right. What was okay, so Milledgeville plays Decatur this week. And Decatur's undefeated. So that's again, that's another the list keeps adding of teams that are so good at A-man football as they continue to play here. Decatur still have to play Cissna Park and Milledgeville. So lots of good 8-man games still to come.
Yeah, and Freeport-Acquin sitting out there at 1-3. Can they get the wins needed? So like I said, those teams have work to do, but it's teams that if they can get those victories down the way, we'll see what happens. Either way, a ton of fun. Mitch, we're going to have a lot to talk about next week. There's a lot of big games.
Looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing where you get to go. Assuming you're back in the saddle at Score.
I'll be back, and no worries, Mitch. You'll get to hear Brian Stocking's voice this week. We'll get the Instant Reacts podcast back up and rolling. And actually, I didn't even get a Stockpile Uniview pick this week. I don't know what his uniform was to keep the stats.
Yeah. When you're gone, it's just it's chaos. It's absolute chaos.
Well, I'll be back in the WQAD studios, and we'll get the Instant Reacts back up and rolling. Mitch, we'll be back again next Tuesday for our regular podcast with a lot to talk about, and the playoff picture will continue to become a little clearer each week as we go along. So, Mitch, that'll do it for this week. We'll be in touch, and we will talk next week.
Yeah, that sounds good.
That'll do it for this week's episode of View from the West. Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to go out to Apple Podcasts or Podbean and subscribe so you can follow along, and downloads will come automatically every week. You can follow along on Twitter at ViewFromWestPod. You can also email me if you're interested in being a sponsor, viewfromwestpod@gmail.com. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.